In WWE, once you've been labeled as a mid-carder, it's almost impossible to break away from that stigma. Just look at Dolph Ziggler or Ricochet for some recent examples of this. However, when someone manages to escape these confines then, in a sense, to the main event, it's a big deal. Even more so when it's one of the most talented performers on the roster. That's exactly what Kofi Kingston managed to achieve, but how did he get to this point? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey so far in Power of Positivity, the Kofi Kingston Story. Kofi Nahaj Sarkodie Mensah was born in Kumasi, Ashanti, Ghana on August 14, 1981 to parents Kwasi and Elizabeth. Here, he and his siblings would spend their initial years before emigrating over to the United States, where they would eventually settle in Boston. And it was in Boston that Kofi would find a love for pro wrestling, taking up a lot of time as a youth watching WWE and idolizing Shawn Michaels. And so right then, he knew what he wanted to be, and after graduating from Boston College in 2005, he began his wrestling training. Come 2006, and he was ready to make his in-ring debut for Chaotic Wrestling, facing off against Evan Six in a losing effort that gave him a taste of what it was like to have a real match. After that, he continued to work hard at establishing a name for himself, performing for NWA New England, Millennium Wrestling Federation, New England's Championship Wrestling, and Eastern Wrestling Alliance, all before falling under the radar of the biggest game in town come September of that same year. Yes, it was here that WWE signed Kofi to a developmental contract, initially sending him down to both Deep South Wrestling and Ohio Valley Wrestling to get TV ready. And the youngster would debut with both of these promotions soon after this, working under the new name of Kofi Nahaj Kingston as he continued to improve week in and week out by taking on the likes of MVP while working as a tag team with Harry Smith. Seeing the potential he had then, WWE started giving the Ghana native his first main roster exposure in 2007 as they began featuring him in a series of dark matches during episodes of Raw. After that, he would head back down to Florida Championship Wrestling, where he would shorten his name to just Kofi Kingston, working there for the remainder of the year as he put the final touches on his act. After this, his full main roster call-up began in December of 2007, when a series of vignettes started airing on ECW, hyping the upcoming introduction of the new superstar, who would then be portrayed as the company's first ever Jamaican performer, complete with thick accent and the country's colors all over his gear. Of course, Kofi didn't have a shred of Jamaican blood in him, but he was a first for the company regardless, being the first ever African-born wrestler in WWE history. His big in-ring debut for ECW would happen on January 22, 2008, when he would defeat local performer David Owen. From there, continuing to impress in a series of matches before he got a chance to shine at the Big Show. Well, the pre-show to the Big Show at least, as at the WrestleMania 24 pre-show on March 30, 2008, he would take part in a battle royal to determine the new #1 contender to the ECW World title. Now, he wouldn't win that night, but getting a chance to wrestle in front of such a large crowd gave him the incentive to improve his stock so that he might get called up to one of WWE's top 2 brands, with him spending the remainder of the spring having a series of great matches with Shelton Benjamin. And this was enough to get Vince McMahon's attention, it seemed, because on June 25th of that same year, Kingston was drafted over to Raw, making his in-ring debut while a part of this brand with a bang by defeating Chris Jericho at June 29th's Night of Champions pay-per-view to win the Intercontinental title. This would be the start of a long-term love affair between Kofi and the mid-card belts, as Kingston would spend much of the next decade winning them, losing them, and then winning them back again, sadly never getting any higher on the card than that. Still though, at this early point in his career, it was a major feather in his cap for him to grab gold of any kind, and so he defended it with pride in the weeks that followed before eventually losing it to Santino Marella at that year's SummerSlam. After that, he would form an alliance with then World Heavyweight Champion CM Punk after coming to his aid during a beatdown from Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase Jr. This would not only spark an on-screen partnership between the two, but an off-screen friendship as well, as they would become travel buddies over the next few years. And with the obvious chemistry the two shared, they were able to work well enough together that on the October 27th episode of Raw, they won the World Tag Team titles together, successfully defending them for the next couple of months as Kofi's stock continued to rise. This eventually led to him earning a spot in the WrestleMania 25 Money in the Bank ladder match, as he got a chance to shine on the main card for the first time. And though it would be his partner Punk who would end up winning the match, Kofi was about to move on to better things of his own as well soon after, as on the June 1, 2009 episode of Raw, he managed to pin MVP to become the United States Champion for the first time. And this run would be even more successful than his previous Intercontinental title run, as he was able to hold on to the belt for a full 126 days, defending it against the likes of Matt Hardy, William Regal, Carlito, and Jack Swagger, before eventually dropping it to The Miz in October. Some had hoped at the time that this would be enough to move Kingston to the next level as he rose to the main event picture, but it would not happen at that time. Instead, he remained a mid-card presence. However, he did make some alterations to his character as he dropped the Jamaican accent and began being billed from his actual home country of Ghana. Not long after that, and he also began a brief program with Randy Orton, which would at one point see each being the last surviving member of the respective teams at the 2009 Survivor Series, facing off one-on-one after that, as Kofi was able to defang the Viper in a major upset victory. It even seemed for a brief moment that this might even be Kingston's ticket to the main event, as on the November 16th edition of Raw, he had a stellar street fight with Orton, at one point memorably giving him a boom drop through a table as the crowd cheered him on wildly. Sadly though, any push that might have come from this was quickly squashed when, during a triple threat match between both men and John Cena in January of 2011, Kofi botched an RKO, causing the, at the time notoriously petulant Orton to audibly call him stupid in the ring and then complain to management afterwards, that being enough to get an alleged Money in the Bank win for the Ghana native at that year's WrestleMania cancelled. This was disappointing for sure, but Kofi continued on regardless, moving over to SmackDown on April 26th of that year, and from there, winning a tournament to crown the new Intercontinental Champion. After that, he would feud with Drew McIntyre over the belt for a while, besting him at both May 23rd's Over the Limit and June 20th's Fatal 4-Way pay-per-views, before losing the strap once again, this time to Dolph Ziggler on the August 6th episode of the Blue Brands show. While this loss marked a dip in his professional career, however, Kofi's personal life was booming at this point, as he would marry his longtime partner Corey Campfield that year, with the two later having two sons, Kai and Orion, and remaining together to this day. Back in the ring, however, and the dip would continue for a while as he failed to regain the Intercontinental title at December 13th's Tables, Ladders, and Chairs. That would change on the January 7th, 2011 episode of SmackDown, however, as Kofi was able to pin Dolph Ziggler to grab the strap for the third time. From there, he continued milling around on the blue brand until April 26th, at which time he was drafted back over to Raw. And once there, he would immediately set about reasserting himself as the king of the mid-card when he defeated Sheamus in a tables match at May 1st's Extreme Rules to win the US title for a second time. Of course, this, like many of his title reigns then, was short-lived, and he would have dropped the belt to Dolph Ziggler by June. It didn't slow him down, however, as instead, the future WWE Champion regrouped and formed a partnership with Evan Bourne, as the two high flyers began calling themselves Air Boom. By August 22nd, the duo were even able to win the WWE Tag Team titles together, and from there, they would go on to defend against teams such as Awesome Truth, David Otunga and Michael McGillicuddy, Dolph Ziggler and Jack Swagger, and Primo and Epico, reigning tall all the way until the new year came. The only reason for them eventually dropping the titles, in fact, seems to be that Bourne had failed a drug test, as the day after their eventual loss, he was suspended for a wellness policy violation. Now solo again then, Kofi entered the 2012 Royal Rumble where, despite being unable to win, he would have one of the standout moments of the night when he saved himself from elimination by walking on his hands to reach the ring step and climbing back into the match, his feet never touching the ground the entire time. This would begin a tradition in the years that followed as the Kofi spot became one of the most anticipated parts of the Rumble match, with fans always eager to see which feat of athleticism he would perform that year so as to stop himself from getting thrown out. Some of the most memorable of these would see him using JBL's commentary chair to bounce back to the apron, parkouring from the fan barricades at ringside, and even standing on a pile of pancakes. Yes, there was always an element of comedy to these spots, and this really helped to get Kingston over with the younger audience, something he would only continue to do in the years to come, but we'll get there soon. In the meantime, he continued to be a constant mid-card presence on Raw, whether this be in singles competition or as part of a tag team with R-Truth. As a team, in fact, Kofi and Truth would go on to have a fair amount of success, becoming WWE Tag Team Champions together in 2012 and holding on to the belts for 5 months by the time things came to a close. Not long after that, and Kingston would return to singles action when he defeated The Miz to win his 4th Intercontinental title. From there, reigning tall for a while as he feuded with Wade Barrett over the strap until the end of that year. And so, with all this success, when 2013 rolled around, Kofi tried once again to raise his stock to a main event level, but still, the company were having none of it. And instead, he would win yet another mid-card title, the US title on April 15th, only to lose that to Dean Ambrose the following month. Yes, it seemed like, aside from that brief moment during his Randy Orton feud, Kingston was locked in an eternal cycle of winning and losing mid-card belts without ever seeing any upward momentum. And it wasn't as if he wasn't talented enough to go higher on the card, it was just that, for some reason or another, Vince McMahon didn't feel like he had what it took to be a top-level player. For everyone involved then, the assumption was that this was how the future WWE Champion's career would continue, and it did so up until the summer of 2014, at which point a new day came and a new opportunity arose. Yes, it was then when Kofi was paired up with Big E and Xavier Woods to form the New Day, a stable that was originally planned to be a modern-day Nation of Domination, but was instead rewritten as a trio of child-friendly babyfaces, all smiles and positivity. Of course, to modern-day WWE audiences, this quickly flopped, with their perceived forced positivity and terrible scripted promos causing audiences around the country to turn on them as they battled against the likes of the Rhodes Brothers and the Usos in the months that followed. And so by April of 2015 then, it seemed like the gimmick was dead and buried, that was, until the group turned heel on an episode of Raw, playing up to the hate of the crowd and instantly becoming 1,000,000 times more entertaining as a result. It wasn't long after that when fans began cheering for them, just as the company had initially hoped for, with the New Day becoming one of the most popular acts and biggest merch sellers in WWE. And what made them even more valuable was the amount of younger fans that they drew into their act, with their colorful antics and various pop culture references making them a rarity in modern-day WWE, a real hit with the youth. Of course, this was helped by the group's outside endeavors as, with the three of them having become close friends by this point, they would often appear together on Wood's YouTube channel Up Up Down Down, playing video games and hitting on the interests of Generation Z. These video game influences would also frequently get incorporated into their matches, with them hitting the ring at WrestleMania 32 dressed as their favorite Final Fantasy characters, while Xavier would belt out the series' battle music on his trombone. Yes, it took a few months to get there, but once everything clicked for the New Day, it clicked big time, with them still being affiliated as a unit to this day, something almost unheard of for tag teams in WWE. And they weren't just basking in this newfound fan adulation either, because they were also winning gold by beating Tyson Kidd and Cesaro at May 2017's Payback pay-per-view, from there on in defending the belts under the Freebird rule as they went through pretty much every other team on the roster. They even got to have a feud with the returning Dudley Boys in the autumn of that year, with the trio beating the legendary team before moving on to anyone else who was still left standing. The Usos fell, the Lucha Dragons fell, the Primetime Players fell. Quite frankly, there was no one who could beat them, and on top of this, they continued to prove that they were a license to print money for the company as they got over a new cereal named Booty-O's that would later be sold on the company's website. After this, a new year came, and with this, the New Day dominated even more. They beat the League of Nations, they beat the Good Brothers, they beat Enzo Amore and Big Cass. At a certain point, they'd beaten everyone on SmackDown. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end, however, because they were drafted over to Raw during the 2016 draft and officially became the longest-reigning tag team champions in WWE history. The group was finally toppled when The Bar was able to beat them at December 18th's Roadblock end-of-the-line pay-per-view, this ending a record run at 483 days. By this point, though, the group were already made men given how successful the act had become, and titles or no titles, they continued to be beloved by fans everywhere for their always entertaining segments. Sadly, though, the train would soon have to be temporarily stopped because on April 10th of 2017, Kofi was taken out of action after an ankle injury required him to get surgery. The next day, the trio were moved back over to SmackDown during the draft, but would not appear in matches until Kingston recovered, instead becoming a regular fixture on Talking Smack, where their natural charisma and chemistry got a chance to shine away from WWE's scriptwriters. And so, when they finally did hit the ring again on the May 30th episode of the Blue Brands show, fans were ready to see them conquer the division once again, something they quickly did as they began a now legendary feud with the Usos, which saw both teams put on some of the best tag team matches WWE had seen in years, pretty much single-handedly keeping the often neglected division afloat. The highlight of this whole program would probably be their excellent Hell in a Cell match at that October's titular pay-per-view, the first ever tag team cell match. And though while Kofi wasn't in the ring on that particular night, this being his turn to take the ringside role within the trio, he would feature in many of their battles with the Usos over the months, reminding fans just how good of a performer he was and how underutilized he had often been. That was why what would soon come would be so magical. Before things got to that point, however, Kofi and the rest of the New Day would continue to make the tag division theirs by winning the SmackDown tag titles on no less than 3 occasions. After that, Kingston would get his Kofi spot once again in the 2019 Royal Rumble, and from there would later receive the opportunity of a lifetime when an injury suffered by Mustafa Ali left a spot open in the following month's Elimination Chamber, with the tag team specialist ultimately getting the chance to take his place. And an excellent showing on that night, combined with a star-making performance during a gauntlet match on SmackDown in the weeks prior, quickly lit a fire under the Ghana native, something which fans picked up on too as a wave of support suddenly flooded over them, this being dubbed Kofi Mania. Yes, audiences were overjoyed to see the man they had watched for so long finally get his shot in the limelight, and they were reluctant to let the moment pass easily as a petition of sorts began to echo around, with people feeling that the company needed to strike while the iron was hot and put Kofi in a match at WrestleMania against the man who had pinned him in the Elimination Chamber, the WWE Champion, Daniel Bryan. In something that was a wonderful moment of symmetry, this was almost an identical situation to the one Bryan had found himself in 5 years prior during the Yes Movement. Though now this time he was on the heel side, and both he and Vince McMahon would play their roles perfectly as they berated Kofi in the weeks that followed, arguing that he wasn't good enough for the main event and that a mere B-plus player couldn't challenge for the world title at the biggest show of the year. And so of course, with every obstacle put in front of him then, Kofi overcame, often with the help of his New Day teammates, eventually earning a shot at Bryan at WrestleMania 35. On that night, 2 history-making moments took place. On one side, there was Becky Lynch capping off her meteoric rise and winning the first ever women's WrestleMania main event. On the other side was Kofi Mania, as Kingston and Bryan put on an absolute masterclass of audience manipulation, bringing them on a dramatic journey before sending them away happy, as Kofi was able to pin the champion in 23 minutes and 45 seconds in what was probably the emotional climax of the night. In fact, you can see the raw emotion on not just the faces of the fans after the bell rings, but on the faces of each New Day member too, with Xavier Woods in particular in tears as he holds his friend above his shoulders, Kofi having just become the first ever African-born WWE Champion in history. It was maybe the last truly feel-good moment WWE has put on to date, and from there, now the top dog, the new champion set about proving he always had what it took as he defended the belt against a variety of opponents including Kevin Owens, Dolph Ziggler, Samoa Joe, and Randy Orton. Unfortunately though, this title run would end up coming to an underwhelming close when he was pinned by Brock Lesnar in just 8 seconds on the October 4th episode of SmackDown, killing much of his heat given the fact that he was then immediately written to brush off the loss and never show any inclination to seek the belt again. This was widely considered to be a Vince McMahon decision as, just like with Rey Mysterio years before, the boss allegedly didn't feel that Kingston was a long-term main eventer, and so, from there on in, the now former champion would be moved back down to the mid-card as he returned to tag team action with the New Day. And he still flourished here, of course, but it wasn't the same as being a WWE title contender, something fans recognized. Still, their frustrations would ultimately amount to nothing because Kingston would continue to stay locked in his mid-card lane, doing the best he could with it as the group won the tag team titles on the November 8th episode of SmackDown. Since then, the New Day have had a partial split after Big E was separated from them during the 2020 draft. Despite this, though, they still remain aligned and continue to appear together at pay-per-views. In fact, their real-life friendship remained so strong that when it came time to renew their contracts, rather than try and push for a bigger deal himself, Kofi instead negotiated with his teammates as a unit, demanding that with his status as a now former WWE Champion, they all deserved an equal raise. Where things go from there remains to be seen, but whether or not he ends up getting another shot with the title, Kofi Kingston has already proven himself as a future Hall of Famer and one of the best and most beloved performers in the company. No matter what happens now, no one can ever take that big WrestleMania win away from him, something we're glad he managed to get in the end because, really, few deserved it more than him, and that's the power of positivity. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.